Okay, guys, good morning. Welcome back to class. We have like 5 minutes and then we will get it going for real. Just getting the camera right. Okay. Good morning, Nina. Good to see you. Hey, Chase. Dimitri, what's up? Hey, Grant. Hope you guys are having a good week. I know we're getting closer to the end of the semester. I don't know, is that less stress, more stress? I kind of, as the professor, it definitely gets a little less stressful as we get to the end because most of our duties are accomplished, having taught you this stuff. But I remember being a student, a little different on your side. See if I have some people coming in. That's why I got to put on the mask. Hello.
Good morning.
Morning. Eloise, good morning to you too. Good morning, Brian. Kylie, good morning to you. Hey there, Amanda. Good to be with all you guys, as usual. Just another minute and a half, pretty much. So you say you have other classes that are meeting in person too now?
Yeah, pretty much all except for one.
Okay. Is it similar to this, where there's like just a big empty kind of room? Like, yeah.
Yeah, the most I've had in a class so far is probably like 6 or 7.
6 or 7. Mm-hmm.
But it's inconsistent. Like one day it's like 6 people, one day it's like 2. So it just depends, honestly.
Yeah. I've seen as many as 4 or so. I think when you guys all came, that was one of the bigger meetings. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good morning. Hey. Claire, Alex, Marin, good to see all you guys in the chat. Okay, then, so let's just get underway. It's about 9 a.m. So good morning, everybody. Thanks again for attending and for hanging in there and dealing with all this interesting material till the end. So we're still in the midst of this new topic of the course, which is philosophy of mind. And we took 2 meetings to kind of thoroughly detail all the material of Rene Descartes and the Sixth Meditation. He gives an argument for dualism. Again, that's the position that the universe and all things within it are made out of 2 kinds of substances rather than just one, namely matter and mind. So as Descartes sees it, the mind is separate and distinct from the material body or the physical body. He gives the argument, which I'll just briefly summarize if I can. It starts by saying that according to the method of doubt, many things are doubtful, including everything you could perceive by the senses, even math and logic, but because, you could be dreaming or whatever. But one thing that cannot be doubted is that you exist because you are thinking. So even if everything that you perceive, including your own body, could be an illusion, you're a thinker that's thinking, so at a minimum, you're a mind. And then the next point is that within the mind, you have ideas. One of those ideas he identifies as the idea of God, and he thinks this is unique and special because it's the one idea of something infinite. So it's the idea of an infinite being. This is a key step in his argument because what he says after that is that if you have an idea of God, which is an infinite being, then there must be a cause of the idea, which is at least infinite. And therefore, there must be a God, the infinite being that causes your idea of him. So since he's known to be perfectly good, he would not deceive us about things that are clear and distinct. So if you have clear and distinct perceptions, the perfect benevolent God guarantees they would be true. One of these being that if you can imagine clearly 2 things being separated or existing separately from each other, then they really could exist separately. And to finalize the argument, he just points out that, as the method of doubt indicates, you can imagine your mind and body existing separately, and therefore they must really be able to exist separately, at least through the power of God to separate the 2 things, because it's conceivable. And after that, he does discuss how there's a few other things that are also clear and distinct, which now at the end of his book, he's prepared to say are certainty. Like there's an external world, and you do have a body. And he lists a few reasons for those things to be clear and distinct also. So anyway, then, we've heard the conceivability argument for dualism from Rene Descartes, but there's 2 sides to this debate, just like most all things. So we're now going to try and understand the monist, or you could say physicalist position in a little bit more detail. So the author for today is Australian philosopher Daniel Stoljar, and his paper from 2005, which is just called Physicalism. Okay, so first of all, let me give you his introduction. So this is the author's name, Daniel Stoljar. Okay, Daniel Stoljar, and I don't exactly know the dates of his life. He's pretty young and still alive, so, but at any rate, this is from 2005, and it's just called Physicalism. Okay, so as the title notes, it's all about physicalism, and we're trying to understand this position, what it's all about. He wants to, first of all, clarify what physicalism is, to define it in a clear way, and then after that, he'll try to give some arguments that it's true. So the first task he has is to kind of state the overall concept of physicalism, and he has a really, I think, blunt and straightforward definition of it. The way he defines physicalism is simply this. Physicalism means, definition, everything is physical. Everything is physical, so says physicalism, the viewpoint of physicalism. So it's a thesis about what everything in the whole universe is made out of. It says 100% of everything is made out of physical matter, atoms, if you like. So therefore, according to the position of physicalism, this universe, this world, this system that we live in is a physical system, and everything within it is physical. So if you believed in physicalism, Stoljar says that you would actually sort of look at it this way, that everything you could ever study, any other field of study, if you really look at it in the biggest picture, it's actually a sub-branch of physics. Even those things that don't immediately appear to be having anything to do with physics, Like, say that you're studying history and you're studying the French Revolution or something. You might say, this has nothing to do with physics. That's a whole different field. But, what physicalism says is, like, metaphysically, in the biggest possible picture, what is the French Revolution? It's a series of actions and events happening on the surface of the earth with these human organisms that are these biological life forms operating according to laws of nature and biology. So in a way, it's really just the physical playing out of all the particles in the universe on this surface of this earth with these life forms. So, I mean, we don't think about it like that. We just think about it in terms of the choices and the actions of the players in history. But these people, according to physics and physicalism, are just very complex bundles of biological material, atoms at the final analysis, grouped together in a certain way, giving rise to these phenomena that we observe. So what is poetry? What is history? What is dance, art, music? At the end of the day, according to physicalism, even though it doesn't immediately appear as such, these are all indirectly branches of physics because they're all about things that are in physical space, operating according to laws of physics. So anyway, just giving you a sense of the way that the physicalist position is conceived of by one guy, Daniel Stoljar, that defends it. There have been other versions of monism going back in ancient history even. If you go way back into ancient Greece, there was this one philosopher named Thales. I'm just going to put his name to make a brief mention about him in passing. Not too important for us, but Thales, Thales. This ancient Greek philosopher believed in a different monism. He thought that everything was made out of water, so 100% of everything is just different states of water. This is a, pre-modern ancient idea. Of course, it doesn't have any credibility today, but you can imagine people living way back then looking at water, seeing how it can turn into a vapor or a solid, seeing how much of it there is in the ocean, seeing how when you breathe on your hand, water condenses. So they thought, okay, maybe everything in the universe is just various states of water. Well, anyway, that's not what we think today in 2021. But I'm just kind of mentioning that there are other versions of monism. Monism in the modern day, physicalism, is just saying everything's made out of matter. Whatever matter is in the end, like atoms, it's all made out of that. Even consciousness, thought, and the internal mental life that we think is so rich and subjective. It's just a physical system playing out. Okay, so sometimes people call physicalism materialism, but I think that it's better to use the label that our author uses of physicalism, because materialism calls to mind associations of a different meaning of that word, having to do with people that are obsessed with possessions and material things. So physicalism avoids the false associations with the non-scientific meaning of the word. So what he thinks we should do then to really deal with this concept and try and understand it better is to try and answer two major questions. So he says there's two big questions concerning physicalism, and he labels them the interpretation and the truth question. So here he thinks are our two big questions to try and answer. Okay, so one he calls the so-called interpretation question. And then the other one he notes as the truth question. Okay, so what they ask, the two questions. First of all, interpretation question asks this: what does it mean to say that everything is physical? What does this mean? How do we interpret the meaning of the claim that everything is physical? So that's this question. What does it mean to say that everything is physical? How do we interpret that? What's the proper understanding or analysis of the claim that everything is physical? One question. Okay? And related but separate is the truth question, which just asks simply, is it true that everything is physical? Is it true, though? Okay, so truth question, is it true? Interpretation question, what does it mean? And Stoljar, the author, he says that to answer one of these questions, you kind of have to deal with the other one first. I wonder if just your own common sense or intuition could tell you which of those do you think you have to kind of first grapple with before you can move on to the other one? Is there any particular one of these two? So either in the chat or in this room, let me know, somebody, if you have a sense. Which of these questions do you think a person would have to tackle first before they could move on to try and answer the other one? Okay, well, Claire and Ellie are saying two opposite things, so there's no tiebreaker. Someone want to break the tie?
I think interpretation.
Okay, good. So you say?
I would say interpretation.
Right. Okay, correct. So a couple of us that are in the room, I don't know if you have your chat going, but you can type it into. Yes, the right answer is actually the interpretation question has to be answered first. Let me try and explain the reason why. You cannot assess whether a claim is true if you don't know what it means. If I tell you right now that there's jargles all over campus, you don't know what I'm saying because you have no idea it's a made-up word. But like, suppose that was a technical term or something, you would not be able to go out and investigate unless you knew what the meaning of the word was first, so you would know what you're looking for. So obviously, yes, or perhaps not so obviously, but one way or the other, you have to interpret the meaning of the claim, and then we can proceed to investigate if it's a true claim or not. But we have to know what it means before we can even perform that assessment. So let's try and answer the interpretation question, or at least let's see how Daniel Stoljar thinks that we could answer it. So then our question for now, what does it mean to say that everything is physical? What does it mean? Oh yeah, thank you, Claire. Not to worry, just trying to be helpful. So in addressing the interpretation question, he says that we really have to look to the notion of what is called supervenience. Okay, so supervenience, this is a big point and a major concept for this unit of the class. So it's an important core concept if you're trying to understand the physicalist position. So supervenience is what I'm going to try and inform you about. So as we try to answer this interpretation question, we have to utilize the concept of what's known as supervenience. Okay, so this is a philosophy and science word. It's often not even included in a lot of standard dictionaries. So if you type it in your essays and stuff, you might get, like, it says it's a spell check error, but it is the way it's spelled. It's super and then venience. Okay, supervenience. What is it? So the idea of supervenience can best be illustrated through the example of what's called a dot matrix picture. Now, today, I know a lot of us, when we're looking at images, we're typically, most of the time, not even looking at paper images on printed pages, but rather like digital screens, computer devices, computer monitors, cell phones. But let me try and explain that if you do have, say, an image that's printed on the page, like say in the newspaper, the front headline image, if you zoomed in very close on that page under like certain magnification, you might notice that it's a dot matrix picture. Now, what do you think that means? That if you zoom into this image, even though, let's say, when you're looking at it, it's like an image of, the president signing a bill, but if you zoomed in really close, you would see that what it's formed out of is a bunch of little, anybody know this? Dot matrix images? No? There used to be dot matrix printers. Now everything's like a laser printer. But I'll try and just explain it to those because I know it's now kind of an almost antique concept. So when you're trying to mass produce printed images and materials, you can generate the same image duplicated over and over by having a grid against which a set of assigned coordinates for individual ink dots to be filled in. Okay, so like if you look at a comic strip or something and you zoom in, you're going to see that it's a bunch of dots and non-dots of various colors. And then when you zoom out and you look at it as a big picture, you just see the image. But what it is formed out of against the most minute level is a bunch of dots and non-dots. And so once you have that coordinate set, you can graft on an image and then you can stamp it onto every similar piece of paper so that it perfectly replicates it. Okay, so dot matrix pictures, to kind of summarize, are just images, but they're formed out of a bunch of little dots arranged in a particular array. Okay, now to give you a more modern analogy to this, because the dot matrix example is kind of from the 70s and everything, it's old philosophy from the late 20th century, David Lewis and others talked about it. But if you want a more updated example, I guess, if you do look at, say, your computer monitor or television screen or cell phone, and you were to zoom in very close to that, say you had a still image, like a meme or something projected on the screen, and you zoomed in really far, you would also see a series of little bits, but these are not dots of ink. Do you know what the units are that form the image of a digital screen? Yeah?
Pixels.
Pixels, correct. Okay, so pixels can also be thought of as a surrogate for my example of ink dots. What is a pixel? A pixel is a little tricolor panel, and they're arranged in a grid against the resolution of your screen. And coordinate instructions are delivered to the system to illuminate the pixels in a variation or different order. And that's why you see the image. And that's why the same instructions can be sent to any similar device with the same resolution and project the same photo or video on all our devices, right? So it's not magic how these things work. There are pixels. The pixels in a particular arrangement display the image that you see on the screen. So whether you're thinking of a dot matrix in terms of the old school physical printed images with ink dots, or you're thinking of the concept of a pixelated image on a digital screen, that's the concept I would like you to think of in your mind right now. So a big picture made out of a bunch of little dots or pixels. Let me try and draw something on the board just so you have a visual to refer to. So suppose this was the screen or page, and the dot matrix image, I'm going to try to make it look like it's made out of dots. So forgive me for my artistic inabilities, but okay. And that's not enough curvature, sorry. I don't know if I'm doing a good enough job, and there's a little glare on the screen, but hopefully it's coming through. Anybody have a sense of what I've tried to depict visually here? It's a what? Or what's a scene? Kind of like an ocean day, you know, it's something at the beach. There's birds flying around or whatever they are, bats. And then you got the water waves and the sun shining down, okay? So just a little beach scene I'm trying to draw out of my very crudely formed dots that are a bit bigger than the pixel because I'm working with crude tools. But anyway, let's pretend that's like a fully fleshed out dot matrix image or pixelated digitized image. So now let's refer to some terminology that the author uses to get us further through this explanation. First of all, I want to point out that anything you see in this picture, whether it's the waves, the birds, the sun, any of the particular objects or things represented in the picture are nothing other than a bunch of dots patterned together in a certain arrangement. So everything in that is nothing other than a pattern of dots. And that means that when we use supervenience as a verb, we would say that all the big scale features of this image supervene on the dots. There's even a piece of terminology that the author will use to refer to the big picture aspects of the composite image. And that's what he calls global features. Okay, so let me just refer to that term, global features. So global features of such a thing are just any big picture aspect of it, something that is formed by the myriad of dots coming together and aggregating. So global features is a big picture aspect of the composite. So, I mean, one of the global features would not be an individual dot or pixel. It would be something that is formed by a bunch of the dots and pixels joined together to create the image. So if we can apply this to the current example, can anybody tell me what could be, for example, a global feature of this dot matrix picture? There's a couple of there's different of them, but what's one of them, for example? Global feature of this dot matrix. So just let me know. You have a few different possible choices. Okay, good. So Ellie, you say the bird, right? The bird is one of the global features. It's a thing in the matrix formed by a bunch of the dots. You could have also said the sun, right? Another possible item in the matrix that's formed by dots, or the waves, okay? Keep in mind, the global feature is not necessarily the entire framed image, but things that you could point out within it that are items or, you know, objects that are shown or depicted within it. So anyway then, the global features of the dot matrix are nothing other than the patterns shown by the dots that form the image. And let's try and make another point. Suppose that you have two dot matrices, okay? Suppose that there's a second dot matrix, which by comparison with this one is identically arranged dot for dot. So if I have a dot for dot duplicate of this, then what will the second image look like? It'll look the same, right? It'll be a replica of the first one. So can we agree on something that if I have created a duplicate of this, a dot for dot replica, it's going to have all the same global features, right? It would still have the birds, the waves, and the sun, because what are those birds, wave, and sun? They're just the pattern shown by the arranged dots. So if I, by hypothesis, if I have a second copy that's the same ordering, it's going to have the same global features. Okay, so point to take, two dot matrices with the same identically arranged parts are going to have the same larger structures as well. So if the parts are identical in their ordering, then all the global features that are made by those parts are going to be the same as well. Okay, so no two pictures could differ in a global feature without being different in the way the dots are arranged. Okay, so we can make these two claims very clearly by logic. If there are two matrices with the same arrangement of dots, then they will have the same global features. And can you complete this thought? If there are two matrices which have different global features, then of course that means therefore that they have to be also different in what other way? If they have different global features, then of course they have to have different what? Talking about part-whole relations. So if the whole is different, like a large scale part of it, like another image does not have the sun, but other things in it are the same. If there's a difference of global features, then of course that must amount to there being a difference in what? The dot patterns, the placement of the dots, correct, okay? Because if they had been the same exact patterning, then there would not have been global differences. So if there are in fact such global differences when comparing two, then there had to be different ordering of the dots, correct. Okay, so then, with that in place, guys, we're going to now shift this example to an analogy to the real physical world, okay? Because that's what this is all about, the physical world and what it's made of. So according to physicalism, this universe and the world that we are in is like the dot matrix kind of analogically or metaphorically. Why? Because according to physicalism, this universe and all the objects, look around you, all the things that you can see, are also formed out of little bits. And they're not ink dots, nor are they pixels. But what would you say would be the physical corollary to those things in the actual reality? Atoms, right. Little tiny elementary physical particles. You could call them atoms. Sometimes people talk about subatomic particles, but you know, the physical matter that forms the objects in the universe are kind of like comparable to these dots. And what are we? And what are, you know, structures and objects that are made out of the little things? We would call those global features of the universe. So like Chapman University, this university, that's one of the global features. So are you, so am I, or any other macroscopic object that's not a particle of matter, right? So things that are formed by the particles, like these images formed by dots of ink or pixels, there's that kind of analogy, right? So the dots are to the global features of the matrix here, as atoms are to the global features of reality here. And the claim then is this: just as we said before, that if you had two dot matrices with the same pattern of dots, they would have to have the same global features. Now take a little mental leap with me, all right? Imagine that there was a second universe aside from this one. And imagine that in that other universe, all the atoms were positioned and arranged exactly as like here. Okay, so it's an atom for atom duplicate. Based on the analogy here, we should expect that that other universe, it's a hypothetical, but that other universe, if it had the same atomic pattern of features there, then what would it be like, that universe? If the second universe had the atoms arranged just like ours, then by analogy to the dot matrix example, the other universe, the duplicate universe, would be just like what? Would be just like ours, correct. So it would have all the same global features. That make sense, right? Because focusing on this case, if you have two matrices with the same dots, they're going to have the same global patterns or global features, right? And so if you had two universes, I know it's a bit of a stretch because universe means one, there's only one, but suppose there was another one which had the same exact atomic pattern and the same array of atoms distributed throughout space in the same exact fashion as here. If so, it would be a carbon copy of our own universe and everything in it. So, question. In this hypothetical duplicate physical universe, would Biden be president right now? Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a trick question. Yes. Why? Well, because if the atomic facts are the same, then all of the social facts, biological facts, historical facts would all be the same too. In this duplicate universe, would there be a copy of you attending of this lecture? Yes, also true, because what are you according to the physicalist position? You're really just an aggregation of atoms. So it's possible to imagine a duplicate scenario where the atomic facts are the same and the same kind of large scale phenomena happen. So physicalism says that everything's made out of matter. And what that means is that everything supervenes on atoms, such that if we had a duplicate universe, there would not be any differences of mental phenomena either. That's the key to this, because some people think that the mind is independent from the physical body and brain, which means that they think that even if the brain was in an identical configuration in a counterfactual scenario, that you could have different thoughts, because the mind is not necessarily governed by the physical features of the brain. But according to physicalism, that's not true. Our brain just is the mind. And so if you can imagine a duplicate physical scenario, a closed physical system with the same atomic facts, then there would be a duplicate of you having the same thoughts and ideas and internal mental phenomena as you. So there's nothing about your mental life that, therefore, according to this view, that's not governed by the physical nature of your brain. If there were a copy of you in a duplicate sort of doppelganger universe, then it would not be able to have different thoughts. So what that implies is that your thoughts and your mental life are merely the consequences of the physical pattern of atoms that compose your brain and everything else around you in reality. So it's like there's no room for there to be another universe that's physically the same but mentally different. The mental stuff is completely governed by what's happening physically and the arranged particles of matter that build everything up. So that's kind of the idea of supervenience. We're supposed to see it as a comparison between the features explained in the dot matrix analogy to the world. And so the comparable things are that the atoms of the world are like the dots in these dot matrices. And the large scale events, people, and so on, objects of the universe are like the global features of the dot matrix. Yes.
Wait, so you're saying that supervenience is comparing the virtual, the dots, to the real world?
Yeah, well, supervenience is just the relation that the big things have to the little bits. We say that something supervenes when we say that the big picture supervenes on the little parts, which means that if you had two identical arrangements of parts, then they would have to have the same structures in the big picture too. And so that holds as well of physical reality, not just the dot matrices. Like when you, let's say, duplicate a bunch of newspaper images by using the same exact grid of ink dots. The claim is that if you think conceptually about the possible case of a second universe that had the same atomic facts as here, then it would have to have the same exact identical events. There would still have been the assassination of JFK, the construction of Chapman University. The Buccaneers would have still won the Super Bowl this year. All the things that happen in this universe would be duplicated there because it's all physical. And so if you control the physical identity of the other universe, we have the same exact facts and the same exact events. That's supposed to make us think that there's nothing about psychology or thought or perception that's other than the physical, because if the physical facts were held fixed, the psychological facts would also be the same. Okay, so in the book, he says, a dot matrix picture has features, and yet all there is to the picture is dots and non-dots at each point of the matrix. The global properties are nothing but patterns in the dots. They supervene. No two pictures could differ in their global properties without differing somewhere in whether there is or is not a dot. This gives us one way to introduce the basic idea of physicalism. The basic idea is that the physical features of the universe are like the dots in the picture, like the atoms. And the psychological, biological, or social features of the world are like the global properties of the picture. Just as the global features of the picture are nothing but a pattern in the dots, so too the psychological, biological, and social features of the universe are nothing but a pattern in the atoms. To use the language of supervenience, just as the global features of the picture supervene on the dots, so too everything supervenes on the physical if physicalism is true. And so this leads to a basic formal definition of physicalism that he gives on page 580. It looks a little wordy, but now hopefully it'll make a bit better sense. He just says it as follows. Physicalism is true at a possible world W. just in case the following. Just in case any world which is an atomic duplicate of W is a duplicate in every respect. Okay, so physicalism is true at a possible world W just in case any world which is an atomic duplicate of W is a duplicate of W in every respect. So all that means is that if physicalism is true here in this universe, that means that any possible second universe that was an atomic copy of ours would be a copy of our universe in all ways. So having physical identity to our universe would not just be physical identity, but it would be same socially, psychologically, behaviorally, and historically. So if the physical facts were the same, nothing could be different. And that's supposed to give you the sense that everything's based on the pattern and arrangement of physical particles. And there's nothing more to anything than that. There's just atoms in space, aggregated in certain combinations and forms. They give rise to the objects that we see around us, just like these dots form the dot matrix images. But again, there's this important point about comparing two. If you had a second one that was identical in terms of the placement of each part, then it would have to have the same identical features at all larger levels of description too. So there he thinks he's actually given his answer to what it means to say that everything is physical. It means to say that everything supervenes on atoms, and that if you had two universes that were atomically alike, they'd be the same in all other ways as well. And so the concept of supervenience is a core commitment of physicalism. To believe in physicalism, you have to embrace this position that if there were, say, a doppelganger of you that was a physical duplicate in another universe, it could not possibly be having different thoughts, because your thoughts are themselves just the playing out of the atoms which form your biological system. Now, dualists don't agree with that, right? Dualists think that the mind and the body are separate. So the mind can do whatever, and the body can be in whatever state it wants, but the mind is something independent and, in principle, separate from that. Well, then what kind of argument could be given that physicalism is true? We've tried to answer the interpretation question, what it means to say that everything is physical. Now, the last task for Stoljar to try and take on is to give an argument as to why this should be thought of as true. So to address the truth question, is it true that everything is physical? He gives us two arguments to try and support, yes, everything is physical, physicalism is true. So I'm going to try and help you understand those two arguments. The first one I think is a little more complex, but it's also, I believe, more interesting. So that one will take a little more time, but we'll start with it. So we're moving on to his discussion of the so-called truth question and his attempt to try and justify the view that, yes, everything is physical. So here's an argument towards that conclusion. He calls it the argument from causal closure. Okay, let's just make sure that we know what word this is. This says causal, not casual. I just noticed that a lot of times in the past, that's a spelling error that could easily slip. But the word's different. Casual means like, you're dressing in sweats at work. Causal has to do with cause and effect. Like what causes another thing. So it's a different word spelled C-A-S-U-A-L. That's casual. This is C-A-U-S-A-L, causal. So anyway, the argument from causal closure has got three premises that lead to the ultimate conclusion. And I'll just start by writing the first one at the top. So the first premise of the argument says this: every event which has a cause has a physical cause. Okay, so every event that even has a cause has to have a physical cause. The claim then of the first premise is that because we live in a universe that's physical, if there's something that happens, it has to have a physical cause, or else it wouldn't have happened. So like if a tree branch falls onto the hood of your car, causing damage to the hood, what's the cause? Well, We could go back in time and understand that perhaps it has to do with the gradual weakening of the branch by weather and other environmental forces. Perhaps a sudden gust of wind was sufficient to finally detach it from the branch, and then its weight, mass, the air trajectory, and angle of its fall caused it to strike the car's hood, leading to the dent. So that's a physical cause of a physical happening in the world. And the argument of causal closure says that all events have to have at least one physical cause. Otherwise, there would have been no basis for them to happen. So the second premise continues this by saying that mental events can cause physical events. Mental events can cause physical events. And you may wonder, what is that saying? Okay, let me explain. All that's saying is actually that thought, like in your mind, can lead to your behavior. Okay, and that's pretty clear. Watch, my finger will snap. Why did that happen? Why? Well, it happened. We could talk about the physical causes. We could say, well, nerve signals were sent to the hand, causing muscles to contract, producing the physical action of the finger snapping, and that was sent by the brain, through the nervous system and spinal cord to those relevant muscle groups. But why did the brain send the signal, right? Why did the brain send the signal to the hand? Because I thought to myself, let me demonstrate how this concept can be explained to my students by showing an example of me thinking of something and then it happening. So like I could say clap, and then I clap, you see? So I can control my body through my thoughts, just like you can, right? If I ask you to type something into this chat, and then you do, and then the typed comment exists, that's an event. And what's the cause of it? Well, we could say the fingers struck the keys, and the fingers had muscle, activity that was, directed by the actions of the brain. But why did the brain send the signal to do the typing? Because you wanted to answer the question, right? Even right now, why are these words coming out of this person here? Because I'm trying to direct my voice to you to explain things. And so the thought to give the lecture leads to the actions that you're seeing now. Just like if you say, I'm going to run a race, or I'm going to do anything, ride a bike, play a guitar, whatever it is, the actions that are elicited by the body that you have generate from the thoughts that you've got. I could go on and on with examples. Sometimes I talked about JFK's assassination as an example because it's something that people know about, a historical event. Why did he die? Well, because he was shot. And why was he shot? Because he was struck by a bullet. Why did the bullet fire? Because it was ejected from the firing mechanism of a gun. And why did that happen? Because pressure was applied to the trigger. Why did this happen? Because the hand squeezed the trigger because of muscle contraction. And why did that happen? Because he wanted to do it, because he had an intention to cause the action, and therefore his intent led to the results. So anyway, in all these random examples, the common thread is this: thought can lead to behavior. That's simple enough. So that's all that the second premise is saying. Mental events, like thinking of doing something, can lead to the physical event, raising your hand or anything else. Okay. Now the third premise is very important to the finishing of the argument. The third premise, it also looks a little technical at first, but I'll make sure it doesn't sound that bad after I explain it. So it says the following. If one event, let's call it event A, if event A causes event B, then there's no other event that also causes B. It's just A. But let me put that here, okay? If event A causes event B, then in that case, there is no other event, perhaps labeled C, that is different from A and that also causes B. Okay. And after that, there'll be the conclusion. But let me explain the third premise. So what it does say is, if event A causes B, then there's no other event C that's different from A and also causes B. So it, as maybe wordy and a little complex as it may look on a first glance, I bet you can understand this. What is it really saying, guys? It's just saying that if something causes something else, or let me put it this way, I'll ask it to you as a question.
For every effect, how many causes are there, according to this claim? For every effect, there's exactly how many causes and not more? One, exactly. That's all it's saying. So it says if one thing causes another, it's the only cause. That's all it says. Because the rest of it is just, there's no other thing that also caused it. It's just that thing. So there's one unique cause for each effect, not two, three, or more than one. Of course, there's not zero causes, but there's also not two. There's one cause for each event. Now, you may look at it as, well, wait, I exist, but I'm caused by both my mother and father. But the event of conception could be looked at as one event that causes you, right? So in general, this third premise is claiming that with causation, there's only one cause, and we exclude other things from also being claimed as the cause. Now, if we put the three premises together, what they imply is physicalism. They imply that mental events are physical events. And if that's true, then everything's physical, because the only thing anybody thought wasn't was mental events. So if they're physical too, then that's it. Mental events are physical events. And let me explain how that follows from these. Okay, so from premise one, whatever has a cause has at least a physical cause. From premise two, the mind can be a cause of your behavior. But since everything that has a cause has a physical cause, that means that the mind which causes your behavior is itself a physical cause. What the third premise does is it says the physical cause of your behavior, your brain, is the only cause. So it's basically limiting you to one. It says it cannot both be that the brain causes the behavior, but also something that's completely different from the brain, like a soul or a ghost or a spirit. That would be to add another cause beyond what's necessary to explain the results. The brain is clearly involved in the production of your behavior. And all this is saying is nothing more needs to be said about what the cause is. It's already self-sufficient to explain the observable behavior on the basis of the physical brain causing that behavior. So to add a second thing, to say it's the brain, but also separate from that, we got a soul and they're not the same, it would be like an unnecessary and superfluous secondary cause. You understand? So like, my brain causes me to speak these words. My brain's making the decisions and stuff to talk. And that's a physical cause. And this is saying that physical brain causing it, it's the only cause. It's not both the brain, but also some mysterious or supernatural secondary thing that could be completely separable from the brain itself. So that's it. Everything that has a cause has a physical cause. My mind can cause things to happen, but that's physical. And there's nothing about it that's not physical, because why have two causes for one effect? So that's the kind of argument given here, yes?
Is the third statement, is that applicable to like big events that have like multiple factors that influence like an event?
That's a good question, okay, because he talks about that. He says some people may try to challenge this premise by saying, I don't agree, because take the case of like a firing squad or whatever. You have 6 different shooters that are all trained on the one person to be executed. And then if you ask why did they die, you'd be tempted to say, well, it's because of 6 different reasons, 6 people shot. But you can also characterize metaphysically the whole firing squad as one cause, like one event. In a way, in that case, the cause is overdetermined, because any of the individual shots, I guess, would have been sufficient to kill the person. But, it sort of depends then how you characterize the causation. Are you thinking of like, there's a very complex set of factors that like caused World War I or something, and you can't just sort of summarize it down to one thing. Well, if you define the event as World War I, then maybe it's hard to point out a single cause. But if you want to be a little more precise, maybe you would talk about the specific elements that led to the full breakout of war. And in each case, you'll find one thing, like the Archbishop Ferdinand Franz Joseph was assassinated. That was like a key event which caused other local events, and they developed gradually into the outbreak of full world war. So I guess there's a way of trying to finesse the description of things so that they don't violate the intuition here. But I take your point, right? It's debatable. You could say that's a bit arbitrary and not intuitive to define the events in such a way that they must have only one cause. Okay, good point. Now, there is one other argument that the author gives after this, subsequently, which also tries to, make the case that physicalism is true. The other argument is much more straightforward and simple, but in my own opinion, it's not as interesting for that same reason. But Anyway, simplicity is nice too. So the second argument is called the argument from methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism. Okay, so the argument basically just says that, first premise, it's reasonable to believe what is believed by the methods of physical or natural science. Okay, so just taking it step by step, the first premise is only saying this. It's just saying that whatever is the scientific consensus in the scientific community, that's reasonable to believe. That's all it's saying. It's saying it's just reasonable to believe scientific claims that are consensus views in science. So like if you believe in evolution or something, I'm not trying to say whether it's true or not personally, but if you believe in evolution, you can't really be claimed as being unreasonable. Like, what kind of crazy idea is that? No, it's not unreasonable. At a minimum, you may disagree with it, but you can't say it's not based on evidence or that there's not considerable empirical support for it. So because science is all about providing testable explanations for observed phenomena, there's no such thing as like a scientific consensus view that's like way out there and it's just a random idea with no evidential support. So at a minimum, whether you agree or disagree with what scientists claim, you can't really say that they're just wacky and coming up with stuff off the top of their head with no evidence. They're at a minimum reasonable. Reasonable doesn't always mean true, but it at least means that you do have some evidential basis. So there we go. It's reasonable to follow the scientists. And the second premise just says that physicalism is believed by the methods of natural science. So if you put those two pieces together, the conclusion is pretty straightforward. So, okay, if it's reasonable to believe whatever science does, basically, and physicalism is believed by science, then the conclusion is just that it's therefore reasonable to believe physicalism. Why? Because scientists believe it and they're reasonable. So you just kind of piggyback on their reasonability by believing the same thing. So it is reasonable to believe physicalism. So he gives us this pair of arguments, causal closure and methodological naturalism, to try and give the case that yes, physicalism is true. In my mind, though, anyway, I like the causal closure argument a little better than this one. This one is clear. I mean, it's, the premises are hard to challenge. I mean, you can't really say that it's not reasonable to believe science. And definitely physicalism is assumed methodologically in science. So I guess it's a valid argument. But the one part about it that's not so satisfying intellectually to me is that, I think it's a little bit more interesting when you are given the reasons why the claim is true. In this case, it's just sort of like defer to the expertise of the scientists. And then that becomes like a black box. Like the scientists are just saying stuff in the scientific community. Who knows why or how, but they're reasonable. So if you follow their lead, you'll be reasonable too. Not necessarily false, because after all, we don't have the time, each individual citizen, to study some of the like higher reaches of like theoretical physics, quantum physics, chemistry. So a lot of times, yeah, we do just have to defer to the community of expertise. But as a intellect, you kind of also would like to have some reasons yourself to contemplate. And at least the causal closure argument gives you those. It says there's only one cause for each effect, right? And we know there's a physical cause of your behavior, so what else could there be? And that kind of gives you a reason to think about it. In this, it sort of says, hey, over there, smart scientists are figuring it all out. Don't worry about it. They'll give us the answer and we could just follow, which is fair enough, I guess, but a little bit less satisfying than you being able to scrutinize and evaluate the reasoning itself. So anyway, then, those are two arguments for physicalism. We're trying to build up, a balanced side of both debates. We've looked at dualism, and now we've seen physicalist monist position. And we're going to look a little more at some physicalist stuff on Monday when we come back. So go ahead, try to read the article by J.J.C. Smart on sensations and brain processes. And then we will also have time on Wednesday to talk about Alan Turing and whether machines or computers could ever have consciousness, which is another interesting question here. So I guess that's about it for today's time. Let me know, everyone, that we're good. I don't want to close the stream too early. That would be like hanging up on a person before you've heard them say goodbye. So let me just know that everything's good, and then I'll close us out for today and have a good weekend. A little delay, lag, or whatever. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Nina, Alex, everybody else. Appreciate it. I'll be available through email if anyone needs anything. There's also my office hours that I've sent around if anyone wants to take advantage of those. But in any case, have a good one, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye.